The welcoming community of Siena Retreat Center provides retreats and programs that renew lives and cultivate a spirituality of peace, healing, and wholeness. In the spirit of the Racine Dominicans, we seek to be a catalyst for a more just and compassionate world. Our spiritual guidance training program prepares men and women to be spiritual guides or spiritual companions, also called spiritual directors. This is a ministry in which somebody listens deeply to the heart of another as they explore their spiritual journey.
We're here to talk about the spiritual guidance training program and some of the foundational aspects of the program. And at the heart of the spiritual guidance training program is the sacred process of story. Story is kind of fundamental to all of our lives. We all have our own stories, our stories of all parts of our lives. But the most important piece of that is to notice when the divine is unfolding within that story, and how the divine works throughout our whole story, our whole existence, our whole lives. And one of the other pieces of it, we see that happening through the universe story. The evolutionary story of that universe, of the world in which we live in, and all the different developing faith traditions, and our own stories, our own personal stories, all in light of what's happening in the world today, all gives us the ability to look at ourselves and wonder how we might do that with spiritual seekers, people who come and sit with us. And underlying all that, or underpinning all that, might be the whole fact that God's unconditional love for us, or the divine's unconditional love for us, not only for ourselves, but God's presence in all of creation, in all of the world, and everything around us. So those stories assist us in learning about ourselves and all that kind of thing, and the sacred connections we make with one another, the relationships we develop. And there's a quote by the theologian John Hott who says, "Evolution occurs because God is more interested in adventure than in pursuing the status quo." I think that's a really great quote to describe kind of what happens at the program, within this universe story and within the whole program. That transition and change and transformation occurs if we're open to it, and God's more interested in that adventure than for us to stay the same, it seems to me. So the universe story, evolutionary consciousness, however you want to name it, is the awakening awakening to God's adventure in our lives, I think. And then if we know that about ourselves, I think that's the way we might want to be with other folks as they come to sit with us. It's an unstoppable energy at the heart of the universe, that notion of God entering into our lives and our beings. And I think one of the ways that we try to do that in the program, Brian Swim and Thomas Berry, Brian Swim is a cosmologist, a scientist, a mathematician. Thomas Berry was an eco-theologian, a priest. And they identified the fundamental orientation of the universe, or three characteristics of the universe: diversity, communion, and interiority. So let me just talk about diversity a little bit, and then maybe you can react to that. Diversity describes the way of being and entering into the universe, the cosmic story of growth and creativity and contemplation, with every creature of Earth as a fellow pilgrim. That diversity is all connected one to another. Diversity is an essential part of the universe story, and I think an essential part of our lives as we're finding out the beauty of diversity in our cultures these days. I think it's essential and necessary for the universe to keep moving. It's a way we can connect to the wonder and the beauty all around us, the rich diversity. I mean, just look at the biodiversity on our planet, the richness of that. Jane Goodall, the researcher who worked with the gorillas, I believe, in Africa, says that each one of us matters and each one of us has a role to play and makes a difference. That we're all essential to every part of our story and the story of the universe. So I think that diversity is pretty important for us to consider as we look at this program and look at the way we want to work and move into that.
Mm-hmm. You know, Terry, that whole sense of how essential story is. I think diversity is, in and of itself, an essential story of the universe. In this program, we invite people to see with their eyes and to feel with their hearts that which may be unique or different, or even unlike ourselves. We encourage each person and ourselves, I believe, to really hold parts of ourselves that we may have dismissed or we dislike, to hold parts of another that we're not necessarily attracted to or inclined to appreciate. And I think we learn to hold our seekers with that kind of compassion. And so in some ways, for me, it's always felt like, you know, we learned to see as God sees, without judgment and without blame, to see every single thing that exists in its diversity as a gift, and that all is beautiful.
Yeah.
Everything that exists is beautiful.
Nice.
And to welcome those differences, I believe, is really to encounter all aspects of every single unique thing that exists. And that invitation to be that awake and aware of that diversity, it really challenges us, I think, to learn to welcome everything that belongs. And that every single thing that exists does have a story to tell.
Yeah. And the privilege that it is for us to be a part of those stories.
Absolutely.
And I think it's a good segue into the next characteristic of the universe, interiority, which I think for many of us in the program, at least the team, and I don't mean to speak for the whole team, but interiority is probably the one characteristic of the universe where we see a lot of application to ourselves as guides and ourselves as seekers or just beings in the world. So interiority is noticing and realizing that everything and everyone has a deep capacity for an interior experience, and identifying what's going on deep within themselves, and noticing that and how that feels and what that looks like, and to find their own voice and to express that and make it uniquely their own as they live into that sense of interiority, a sense of coming to a place where God, the divine, resides deep inside, that spark of the divine that we all hold. One of the things I think interiority calls for in all of us is a regular, consistent, contemplative practice, contemplative listening, or whatever you might want to call it, to ask that question that I mentioned earlier: where is it coming from inside me? How does each person experience and integrate how God is with them and for them and all around them, the universe? I think it's a pretty important piece of the program. Interiority is like taking that long, loving look at the holy within my heart, in my being, in the universe that is me, that we all are, or the universe coming to know itself. This was another quote from someone, I don't remember the source, but they said that interiority demands an exquisite attention to life. I think that's a beautiful way to put it. You know, how do we pay attention to life exquisitely? You know, how often do we think of our life as an exquisite life, a beautiful, intricate place of the divine? Yeah.
Mhm. You know, what you're hinting toward makes me realize really that this principle of interiority really is the one message of the universe story that is most illuminated, I think, in the soul of this program.
I think so too.
In the way that the program kind of has been crafted and created, we really encourage, as you kind of suggested, we really encourage people to grow in their capacity to notice and to become aware of their interior experience, of their inner experience. Like, what's that telling them? What's it surfacing for them in a way that this may be something that needs to have a voice or they need to pay attention to?
Yep.
And what I find is a lot of times in our lives we get so busy that that voice doesn't get heard.
Yep.
And that interior journey of noticing what's inside of me, what's rattling my cages, what feels uncomfortable, or where is this question coming up from within me? That kind of nudging that happens within us at an interior level is really, in many ways, the impetus toward our transformation, toward the growth that happens as a result of us moving deeply inside. And we create that in the program by the way we invite them to look at that in every aspect, whether it's, you know, through the topics that are presented, through their own awareness of what's happening inside of them, from reading, from listening to topics, from guiding people, being the seeker in both practice and in real life with those that come to them, and in supervision. What's stirring? What's under the wave that needs to be looked at?
Yeah.
And so each time we participate in that noticing, we will be nudged closer and closer to a greater degree of self-awareness and hopefully love toward what's within us, the basic goodness of who we are, and hold that in a way that we really grow and change and are transformed. So I think that, like you started off by saying, the interiority principle is just, it's critical and it's so fundamental. And the hallmark question that we often ask, and no matter what part of the program we're in, is to ponder, is go inside, notice, listen. What are you hearing? And what are those inner stirrings inviting you to recognize?
Yeah. And I think that deep knowing and that getting closer to who we really are, and who everything around us is and how everything affects everything else brings us to the last principle, communion. That communion is everything in the universe is connected, communal. Is one thing is related to the other, and nothing exists without anything else. So, like this dialogue here today, we couldn't be having a dialogue without each other. So we're in communion with one another as we do this, as we are in many other ways, it seems to me. And it's all about those relationships that we form. First of all, with ourselves, with God, with others, and those right relationships that we have with those folks is translated into the universe, because all of those relationships are part of the universe, and we are the universe coming to know itself. So communion is about that relationship, that essence of existence, if you will. Again, that nothing is itself without anything else. We're all dependent on one another. We're all communally connected. So choosing to enter into communion with ourselves, with one another, with everything around us, is really choosing to enter into a love relationship, to love all that is around us. And love is at the center, the union of all the things in the universe. The universe, communion is I think a way to describe communion is that the communion is the beating heart of the universe, kind of the palpability, the life force that pulls everything together, that makes everything connected.
Mhm.
And the quote from, I think it actually goes back to Carl Sagan days,
Mm.
and people have used it. All the folks moving into the new universe story, they talk about that we are created from the same stardust, that we are all stardust.
Mhm.
So we're all connected from 13.8 billion years ago to the present, to everything that was, is, and will be. So we're all in communion with all of that stuff.
Yeah. And so whether we are conscious of it or not,
Yes.
that is
Yeah.
happening, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And go ahead.
But I think that the consciousness piece makes it even more complete,
Mhm.
gives it a richer experience of everything around us.
So in the program, in many ways, we are a community of learners
Mm-hmm.
and seekers and guides.
Yeah.
And we are privileged to be in the company of one another, where our growth and the exploration of ourselves is
Mhm.
happening at every level for every
Yep.
single person that's part of this learning, creating, engaging community. And we are not just growing with one another, but we're growing into this consciousness around the divine
Mhm.
as a community. And we're growing into our consciousness of what it means to be a spiritual guide, and that we are doing that together, and that
Mhm.
that cannot happen unless it's intrinsically connected,
Hmm.
or we are intrinsically
Yep.
connected to one another. So the circles we form, whether they be in large groups or small groups or one-on-ones, or whether it's bidden or not bidden,
Mhm.
reminds us that our personal transformation is deeply rooted in this quality of energy and presence
Yep.
that is somehow held and maintained within this circle of those of us who engage in it.